The crying never stopped. Every night at 2:17 in the morning, the sound tore through the 40-room mansion like a wounded animal. Raw, guttural, relentless. Harrison Blackwell, a man who built empires with cold precision, stood outside his son's bedroom door and did nothing. 6-year-old Caleb couldn't hear his own screams, couldn't hear the silence that answered back. The specialists said it was behavioral. The psychiatrist said it was trauma. The family said it was hopeless. But Rosalie Hayes, the new maid who wasn't supposed to touch anything in the East Wing, saw something else in the boy's twisted fingers and desperate eyes, a language no one had bothered to learn. What she did in those forbidden midnight hours, something no specialist had thought to try, something no family member would accept, would force the entire Blackwell dynasty to face a devastating truth. If the child was never broken, then the one who was truly disabled was the man who brought him into this world. Rosalie Hayes arrived at the Blackwell mansion on a Thursday morning in late September, when the maple trees lining the estate were just beginning to surrender their green. She carried one suitcase and a canvas bag that smelled faintly of lavender soap. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Pemberton, a woman whose face seemed permanently arranged in mild disapproval, led her through corridors that stretched longer than any street Rosalie had ever lived on. Marble floors gleamed like frozen lakes beneath crystal chandeliers that caught morning light and shattered it into fragments. Everything whispered money in a language Rosalie had never learned to speak. Mrs. Pemberton stopped abruptly where the corridor split. "The East Wing is off limits," she said, her voice dropping. "That's where the boy stays. Master Caleb, you're not to go near that area unless specifically instructed. The family prefers privacy regarding the child." That first day blurred into unfamiliar rooms and endless tasks. Rosalie met Mrs. Vivian Blackwell, the steel-haired matriarch who issued commands through Mrs. Pemberton, never speaking directly to the help. The old woman's eyes were sharp and assessing, her back rigid with authority born from old money and older grief. It was nearly midnight when Rosalie retreated to her small third-floor room. She thought about her daughter Keisha, staying with her sister across town, and wondered if she'd made the right choice taking this live-in position. The money was better than anything she'd earned before, but the distance felt like an ocean. She was nearly asleep when she heard it, a sound that cut through the mansion's stillness like a blade. A child crying. Not ordinary tears, but something deeper, more desperate. A sound that came from a place where words couldn't reach. The crying went on and on, rising and falling in waves. Rosalie waited for footsteps, for voices, for some adult to respond. But the mansion remained silent, except for that one terrible sound. After 20 minutes, she couldn't bear it anymore. She pulled on her robe and followed the crying through empty corridors until she found herself at the forbidden East Wing. She stood there listening to those heartbreaking sobs and made a choice that would change everything. She walked through that door. The crying led her to a room filled with untouched toys and pristine books arranged in perfect order. In the center sat a small boy with dark hair and red-rimmed eyes. He didn't turn when she entered, just rocked slightly, his hands moving in strange, desperate gestures that looked almost like sign language but weren't quite right, like someone trying to speak in a language they'd never been properly taught. When she moved into his line of sight, his face crumpled and fresh tears fell. But this time his hands reached toward her, not grabbing, just reaching, trying to bridge a distance that had always been too far. Rosalie opened her arms, and Caleb collapsed into them, his body shaking with sobs that had no sound for him to hear. She held him until the crying stopped, until his breathing steadied, until he fell asleep clutching her robe like it was the only solid thing in a world that made no sense. As she sat there on the floor of that enormous, lonely room, Rosalie made a silent promise to a child who couldn't hear it. She would find a way to understand. She would find a way to reach him, even if it meant breaking every rule in this cold marble palace. The next morning, Rosalie went about her duties as if nothing had happened. She cleaned bathrooms, changed linens, polished silver until her reflection stared back from every surface. But her mind was elsewhere, replaying the image of that little boy's desperate hands trying to form words in a language no one understood. During her afternoon break, while Mrs. Pemberton was occupied and Mrs. Vivian napped, Rosalie slipped into the mansion's library. The room was magnificent. 3 stories of books connected by a spiral staircase, with leather chairs and reading lamps that cast warm pools of light across Persian rugs. She ran her fingers along the spines, searching for something specific. Finally, on a shelf in a dusty corner that looked untouched for years, she found it. A worn textbook titled American Sign Language, a comprehensive guide. The cover was faded, pages yellowed with age. Someone had owned this book once, had tried to learn from it. There were pencil marks in the margins of early chapters, but judging by the thick dust, that someone had given up long ago. Rosalie tucked the book under her apron and returned to work. That night, after her duties were finished, she sat in her small room with the textbook open on her lap. The alphabet came first. Simple hand shapes for each letter, clearly illustrated. She practiced forming them, her fingers awkward at first, struggling to bend in the right ways. The movements felt strange, foreign, but she kept practicing. A, B, C, D. Each letter a small victory, each shape a new word in a language she was determined to master. At 2:17 in the morning, the crying started again. But this time, Rosalie was ready. She made her way to Caleb's room and found him in the same spot as before, sitting on the floor, tears streaming, hands moving in those desperate, incomplete gestures. She sat down in front of him and waited until his eyes found hers. Then, slowly, deliberately, she signed the letter C, then A, then L, then E, then B. His name, spelled out in the language he'd been trying to speak all along. Caleb stopped crying. His eyes went wide, fixed on her hands with frightening intensity. For several seconds, he just stared, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Rosalie signed his name again, slower this time, making sure each letter was clear. The boy's mouth opened slightly. His hands, which had been clutching his pajamas, slowly rose into the air. He tried to copy her movements, his small fingers struggling to form the shapes. C-A-L-E-B. Not perfect, but recognizable. When he finished, he looked up at her with an expression that broke her heart and mended it all at once. It was hope. Pure, desperate, disbelieving hope. Over the next 2 weeks, Rosalie lived 2 lives. During the day, she was the invisible maid, moving through the mansion with her cleaning supplies, careful never to draw attention. But at night, after everyone was asleep, she became something else. A teacher, a bridge, a lifeline. She would slip into Caleb's room, and they would sit on the floor together, practicing signs from the worn textbook. Simple words at first. Hello. Thank you, please. Sleep. She wasn't fluent, barely a beginner herself, but she was learning, and Caleb was learning faster. The crying stopped. Not immediately, but gradually, night by night. Caleb began to smile, his face lighting up when he got signs right. They developed a routine. She would enter his room, and he would immediately sit up, ready to learn, eager to add more words to his vocabulary. For the first time in his young life, someone was speaking his language, and he soaked up every sign like a plant, finally finding water after drought. But secrets in the Blackwell mansion had a way of revealing themselves. One night, as Rosalie was leaving Caleb's room, she nearly collided with Harrison Blackwell in the hallway. She had seen the man only twice before, once from a distance, once through a window. Up close, he was taller than she'd expected, with dark hair graying at temples and eyes that looked perpetually exhausted. He froze when he saw her emerging from his son's room. "What are you doing here?" His voice was quiet but sharp, like a knife pressed against skin. Rosalie kept her voice steady. "The boy was crying, sir. I came to check on him." Harrison's jaw tightened. "Mrs. Pemberton should have made it clear. The East Wing is off-limits to staff. My son has specialists who handle his needs. You're not to come here again." He moved past her toward the stairs, dismissing her with silence. But Rosalie couldn't let it go. "With respect, sir, I haven't seen any specialists come at night when he cries." Harrison stopped, his back rigid. When he spoke again, his voice was different, quieter, more tired. "My son has a condition. He can't hear. He can't communicate. The crying is behavioral. The doctors say it will stop when he learns to cope. We're doing everything we can." Rosalie felt something crack open inside her chest. "Sir, has anyone tried teaching him sign language?" The question hung in the air between them. Harrison turned slowly. "Sign language won't help. He's too young, too limited. The specialists have been very clear about his prognosis." His voice carried the weight of years of failure. "With respect, sir," Rosalie said, knowing she was crossing uncrossable lines, "I've been teaching him signs from a book in your library. Simple ones. He learns fast. He understands. He just needs someone to listen in the right language." Harrison stared at her for a long moment. She couldn't read his expression. It could have been anger, could have been disbelief. Finally, he said, "You're overstepping, Miss Hayes. Significantly. Consider this your only warning." He walked away, leaving Rosalie alone in the darkness, wondering if she'd just lost her job. She hadn't. But 3 days later, everything changed. Mrs. Vivian Blackwell appeared during Rosalie's morning shift, her presence announced by the sharp tap of her cane. She moved like a judge approaching the bench. Mrs. Pemberton trailed behind, and there was something apologetic in the housekeeper's face that made Rosalie's stomach drop. "Miss Hayes," Vivian said, her voice cold as winter silver. "A word in the study, if you please." The study was all dark wood and leather, with oil paintings of stern ancestors watching from walls. Vivian settled into a wing-back chair like a queen taking her throne. She didn't invite Rosalie to sit. Instead, she let silence stretch before speaking. "My grandson's nanny informed me you've been entering the East Wing without permission, teaching Caleb, attempting to teach him, I should say, given that proper specialists, people with actual credentials, have already determined the futility of such efforts." Rosalie kept her hands folded, her voice level. "Ma'am, with respect, Caleb is learning. He understands basic signs. He's communicating." Vivian's cane tapped once against the floor, sharp as a gavel. "Caleb has a profound developmental disability. He is deaf. Yes, but his limitations extend far beyond hearing. The doctors have been quite clear. His cognitive capacity is severely restricted. He will never communicate meaningfully. He will never live independently. The kindest thing we can do is keep him comfortable and stop filling his head with false hope." The words landed like blows. Rosalie felt her hands tighten. "Ma'am, I've been with him at night. I've seen him learn. He's not what those doctors think." Vivian stood and moved closer, eyes like chips of ice. "You've been with him 2 weeks. I've lived with this situation 6 years. Do not presume to understand what you cannot possibly comprehend. My grandson is damaged. That is a tragedy, but it is also a fact." This isn't about miracles, Rosalie said, her voice stronger. It's about trying. It's about someone actually listening to him. Vivian's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes, something dark and wounded. You think we haven't tried? This family has been broken by that boy's condition, and I will not allow false hope to break it further. You are forbidden from entering the East Wing. You are forbidden from any contact with Caleb whatsoever. If you disobey, you will be terminated immediately. Am I understood? Rosalie saw the wall before her, not just Vivian's will, but grief that had calcified into stone over 6 years. Yes, ma'am. You're understood. As she turned to leave, Vivian spoke softer, almost to herself. We all wanted miracles once, but miracles don't come for families like ours. We learned that lesson when my daughter-in-law bled out on a hospital table while that deaf child lived. That night, Rosalie lay in her bed staring at the ceiling. At 2:17 it came. Caleb crying again. The sound that had stopped for 2 weeks. Now back, raw and desperate. The sound of a child who'd learned there was a bridge to the world, only to watch it burn. She lasted 10 minutes before she broke. She got up and walked to the East Wing, knowing she was risking everything. She found Caleb on the floor, hands moving in desperate signs. When she knelt, his eyes found hers. Then his small hands signed, "Please, help, friend." Rosalie held him while he cried. She didn't teach that night, just held him until he fell asleep. She carried him to bed and sat beside him until dawn, knowing she'd probably lost her job, but knowing some things mattered more than employment. The summons came at breakfast. Mrs. Pemberton delivered the message with regret. Mrs. Vivian wanted to see her immediately. Rosalie followed to the study, her heart steady. She'd made her choice. She'd face the consequences. But when the door opened, it wasn't just Vivian waiting. Harrison stood by the window, and sitting in Vivian's chair was a woman Rosalie had never seen. Younger, with kind eyes and a leather portfolio. "Miss Hayes," Harrison said, his voice uncertain. "This is Dr. Nina Foster. She's a developmental specialist who works with deaf children. My mother called her for a second opinion regarding Caleb." Dr. Foster stood and extended her hand. "Mrs. Vivian mentioned you claim Caleb's been learning sign language. Is that accurate?" Rosalie glanced at Vivian's unreadable expression. "Yes, ma'am. I've been teaching him basic ASL from a textbook. He learns quickly. He understands." Dr. Foster's eyes brightened with hope. "Would you be willing to demonstrate? I'd like to observe an interaction between you and Caleb." Vivian spoke, her voice tight. "I want it on record that I believe this is cruel, raising hopes that will be crushed. That boy has been evaluated by 7 specialists, all reaching the same conclusion." Dr. Foster said gently, "Those evaluations assumed Caleb couldn't communicate. If Miss Hayes has established direct communication, that changes everything." Harrison gripped the window frame, knuckles white. "My son has been crying every night for 6 years. Every specialist has failed. Then this woman comes, and suddenly he stops crying. So yes, Dr. Foster, you have my permission, because I need to know if we've been—" He stopped. Vivian finished, voice sharp as glass. "Wrong. If we've been wrong about him this whole time." She stood, leaning on her cane. "I'll have Mrs. Pemberton bring the boy. You'll have your demonstration. God help us." 20 minutes later, they gathered in the drawing room. Caleb was brought in, looking small in the vast space. His eyes were red-rimmed. He didn't look at any of the adults. Not his father by the fireplace, not his grandmother, not Dr. Foster. He looked only at Rosalie. She knelt to his eye level. For a moment they just looked at each other. Then she signed. "Hello, Caleb. How are you today?" His face transformed. The blank expression fell away. His hands came up immediately. "Hello, friend." I was sad, crying. "I missed you." Behind her, someone drew a sharp breath. She kept signing. "I'm sorry I couldn't come, but I'm here now." His hands moved faster. "Grandmother said you couldn't come anymore, said I shouldn't try to talk because nobody understands. But you understand. You see my words." Dr. Foster moved closer, wonder mixing with grief on her face. "My God, he's fluent. After only 2 weeks. She looked at Rosalie. "How many hours?" 3 weeks. Maybe 4 hours total." 4 hours? De Foster repeated, voice breaking. She knelt beside them and signed. "Hello, Caleb. My name is Nina. I'm a doctor who helps. I know hand words, too. Can we talk?" Caleb's eyes widened. He looked at Rosalie for permission, then back at Dr. Foster. "You know hand words? Real words? Not just friend?" Dr. Foster's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, I know hand words. Lots of people know hand words. You're not alone." Caleb's hands stilled, then moved again. "Nobody knows hand words here. Only friend knows. Everyone else just looks. Nobody talks to me. I try, but nobody sees my words. I thought maybe I was broken. Maybe I wasn't real." The room went silent except for hands moving through air. Harrison had moved closer, face drained of color. Vivian gripped her cane, hands trembling. They watched as Caleb told them what it felt like to live in their silence. Dr. Foster signed back. "You're real. You've always been real. You're not broken. We just didn't know how to see you." "I'm sorry." Caleb's hands stilled. Then he signed something that broke everyone. "Why doesn't Daddy talk to me? I see Daddy, but Daddy walks away. He never stays. Does Daddy not want me? Is it because I'm broken?" Harrison made a raw, broken sound. He crossed the room and dropped to his knees, pulling Caleb into his arms. He held him like he was making up for 6 years in one embrace. Caleb's arms wrapped around his father's neck, and for the first time, he felt his father hold him back. When Harrison pulled away, his face was wet with tears. He looked at Dr. Foster with desperate eyes. Teach me how to talk to my son. I'll cancel everything. Just teach me." Dr. Foster took his hand and positioned his fingers. "This means I love you." Harrison looked at his son and made the sign. 3 fingers extended toward Caleb. The movement was clumsy, but the meaning was unmistakable. Caleb's face lit up like sunrise. His hands moved in response over and over. "I love you, Daddy. I love you. I love you." Then he threw himself into his father's arms again, and Harrison caught him, and finally became the father he should have been. Across the room, Vivian sat still, tears streaming down her face. When Dr. Foster approached, Vivian didn't look up. "I was wrong. Dear God, I was so wrong. I thought I was protecting them from false hope. But I was protecting myself. What have we done to that child?" Dr. Foster knelt beside her. "You did what you thought was right. Now you can do better." She looked at Rosalie. "If Miss Hayes hadn't broken your rules, we might never have known. Sometimes the people we dismiss are the ones who save us." Vivian's eyes found Rosalie's. They looked at each other, the matriarch and the maid. Then Vivian bowed her head in respect. When she lifted her gaze, her voice was steady despite tears. "Miss Hayes, this family owes you a debt we can never repay. You gave my grandson a voice. You gave my son back his child. You did what 7 specialists couldn't do. You simply listened." Harrison stood, Caleb in his arms. "Dr. Foster says Caleb is actually quite advanced cognitively. With proper ASL education, He could attend mainstream school, have a completely normal life. We could have known this years ago. Dr. Foster said firmly, "You can be his father now. That's what matters." She turned to Rosalie. "I'd like to hire you as Caleb's primary ASL instructor and aide, with appropriate compensation." Rosalie looked at Caleb, who signed, "Please stay. Friend, stay. Please." "Yes," she said. "I'll stay." 6 months passed in transformation. The mansion became headquarters for Caleb's Voice Foundation. Signs were posted everywhere, labels on doors, vocabulary on refrigerators, hand-shaped diagrams on bulletin boards. Harrison cleared his schedule to learn ASL. He installed video call systems so he could sign with Caleb during lunch breaks at work. He read bedtime stories in ASL, his hands forming words with increasing fluency. The exhaustion in his eyes transformed into purpose, maybe redemption. Vivian, despite her age and arthritis that made her hands ache, learned with the determination of someone making penance. She practiced every day, refusing to give up even when pain made her fingers clumsy. She and Caleb developed their own relationship, building something new from the ashes of 6 lost years. She would sit with him every afternoon, reading picture books and signing stories, both of them learning together, both healing. Caleb bloomed like a flower finding sunlight. He attended a school for deaf children 3 days a week, coming home with stories about friends and teachers and all the normal childhood experiences he'd been denied. His vocabulary expanded exponentially. His personality emerged. Funny, curious, occasionally stubborn, sometimes mischievous the way healthy 7-year-olds should be. He asked endless questions. Why was the sky blue? Where do birds sleep? How do cars work? Each question was a gift, proof his mind had always been there, sharp and eager, just waiting for someone to unlock the door. The foundation grew faster than anyone anticipated. Harrison poured resources into it, and Rosalie built the infrastructure, developing programs, hiring staff, creating curriculum. Families came from across the state, then across the country, seeking support. The mansion became a hub of activity, its vast rooms repurposed into classrooms and meeting spaces. What had been a cold, empty palace became something allo, something meaningful, something that changed lives. 1 year after that first demonstration, they held an anniversary gala. The ballroom filled with hundreds. Families helped, donors, advocates, deaf community leaders, children learning to communicate for the first time. The room buzzed with conversation, both spoken and signed, a beautiful chaos of connection. Caleb, now 8 and confident, stood at the microphone with his father beside him. He addressed the crowd in ASL, while Harrison voiced his words, father and son working together, bridging worlds. "When I was little," Caleb signed, his movements fluid and natural, "I thought I lived in a big, empty house where nobody could hear me. I thought I was the only person in the whole world. I thought maybe I wasn't real, maybe I was a ghost nobody could see. Then Rosalie came. She taught me I wasn't alone, that I just needed to find people who spoke my language. Now I live in a house full of talking hands and people who understand me. Now I have a father who reads me stories and tells me jokes. Now I have a grandmother who teaches me about history. Now I have friends at school. Now I have a dog named Rocket, who's also deaf, but we understand each other perfectly. Now I'm not alone anymore. And because of this foundation, other kids don't have to be alone either. That makes me really happy." The applause was thunderous, hands waving in the air in the deaf community's version of clapping, creating visual thunder just as powerful as sound. Rosalie watched from her table, tears streaming down her face, feeling the circle close. From that first night of crying to this moment of joy. From one child's silence to hundreds of children finding voices, from breaking rules to changing them entirely. It was more than she'd ever dreamed possible when she'd first heard a child crying and made the choice to walk through a forbidden door. Harrison found her as the evening wound down. Before you arrived, I was planning to send Caleb to a residential facility. I'd started the application process. If you'd come a month later, he would have been gone. I would have sent my son away because I was too cowardly to learn his language. His voice was rough with emotion. You didn't just teach him ASL. You saved his life. You saved our entire family. How do you thank someone for that? You live it? Rosalie said simply. You be the father he needs. You support the foundation. You help other families. You take what you learned and pass it forward. That's all the thanks I need. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching Caleb across the room playing with other deaf children, his hands moving in animated conversation, his face alight with joy. A child who'd been written off as profoundly disabled, now thriving. A child who'd been sentenced to silence, now speaking volumes. All because one person decided he was worth listening to. As guests began leaving, Rosalie found herself standing in the mansion's garden, in almost the exact spot where she'd stood a year ago. The night was warm, stars bright overhead. The mansion lit up behind her like a beacon of hope. She thought about that worn textbook, about late-night practice sessions, about a little boy's desperate hands trying to form words no one could see. She thought about how far they'd all come, and how much further there was still to go, how many children were still out there waiting for someone to learn their language. Thank you. She turned to find Caleb running toward her across the grass, his bow tie askew, hair mussed from playing. He signed as he spoke, his voice rough but determined. Thank you for seeing me, for hearing me, for teaching Daddy how to talk to me, for not giving up, for breaking the rules, for everything. You're my best friend. You'll always be my best friend. Rosalie knelt down and pulled him into a hug, feeling his small arms wrap around her neck with complete trust. You're my best friend too, she signed against his back where he couldn't see but could feel the movement. And you taught me just as much as I taught you. You taught me about courage, about persistence, about refusing to accept silence as your fate. You're going to change the world, Caleb Blackwell. I know it. I've always known it. When she pulled back, Caleb was grinning his gap-toothed grin. Maybe, he signed. But you changed it first. You changed mine. Then he ran back toward the house, toward his father waiting in the doorway with arms open, toward a life full of language and love and infinite possibility. Rosalie watched them sign to each other in easy, practiced fluency, watched Harrison scoop him up, watched them laugh together over some joke she couldn't hear from this distance, but could see in their faces, in their hands, in the way they looked at each other with complete understanding. And she thought about all the other families out there, all the other children crying in silence, all the other parents who didn't know there was a bridge available if only someone would build it. The work wasn't finished. It would never be finished. There would always be more children who needed help, more families who needed support, more barriers to break down. But it was started. And sometimes, starting was the hardest part. Sometimes all it took was one person willing to break the rules, willing to listen when everyone else had stopped trying, willing to believe that every child deserved to be understood, regardless of how they communicated, or what the experts said was possible. In the mansion behind her, Harrison carried his sleeping son up the stairs toward bed, signing good night to Vivian as they passed her in the hallway, the old woman signing back with movements that were still slow but sure. Caleb's hands moved even in sleep, signing dreams in a language his father could now understand, a language that had saved them all. And in the library, on a shelf of honor behind glass, that worn ASL textbook sat in a place of reverence, a reminder that knowledge left behind is never truly lost. It just waits, patient and ready, for the person brave enough to pick it up and use it to change the world.